and ask the clerk to call the roll, please. We're going to first call the House committee, then we'll call the roll for the Senate committee.
Representative Bauman. Representative Blanton.
Present. Here.
Representative Bowling.
Here.
Representative Bridges.
Know you was first.
Representative Burke.
Present.
Representative Chester Burton.
Present.
Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Dotson.
Present.
Representative Flannery.
Here.
Representative Fugate.
Here.
Representative Gentry.
Here.
Representative Grossberg.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative McCool. Representative Miles. Representative Smith. Representative Williams.
Here.
Representative Wesley.
Here.
Representative White.
Here.
And Chair Gooch.
Here. Okay, now I would turn it over to my co-chairman, Senator Smith, to call the roll for the Senate.
Okay, for our Senate members at this time, I ask the clerk to call the roll.
Senator Carpenter. Senator Mills.
I'm here.
Senator Schickel. Senator Southworth. Senator Webb. Senator Westerfield. Senator Wheeler. Senator Williams. Senator Turner. And Chair Smith.
Present. So I'll turn it over to Chairman Gooch.
Thank you. I certainly want to thank everyone for coming out to the meeting, our committee members. I know that during this recess, you have a lot of other things to do before getting ready for the regular session. But I think we had some issues that had happened in Kentucky that I don't think had ever happened before, and in a way that affected our citizens. And I felt like that we needed to have this meeting just to get some answers and to try to ensure that especially since it was predicted that it could happen, and it's predicted that it might in the future happen again, and we certainly don't want it to be the norm. And so I wanted to have this committee meeting. Before I start, though, I would like to introduce, we have several new members that are new to the committee on the House and the Senate side. I'd like to introduce those. We have Representative Jared Bowman. We have Representative Lindsey Burke, Representative Beverly Chester Burton, Representative Al Gentry, Representative Daniel Grossberg, Representative Bobby McCool, Representative Tom Smith, and Representative Wade Williams. Did I miss any House members that are new to the committee? Certainly want to welcome you. And Senator Smith, would you like to welcome some of the new or announce the new members of the Senate?
Yes, I think we, of course, we're proud of all of our members, but we're going to give a special shout out to Senator Williams. I was looking for him here. Senator Williams, there you are. Welcome to our committee. It looks like you're going to get baptized by fire, as we say at home. You get to welcome us today. So welcome to our committee.
Okay, thank you. And we have some people in the audience that I would like to recognize. I'm pleased to see that Miss Michelle Bloodworth is in the audience today, and she's the president and CEO of America's Power. Her organization represents coal-fired electricity and supply chains that support the coal fleet. America's Power has worked to educate operators, public utility commissioners, federal regulators and agencies, and Congress that the current pace of the grid transition is a threat to grid reliability. I'm also glad to have a couple of my county judges today. We have from Union County, Judge Adam Onan, and then also from Webster County, we have Judge Steve Henry. So we're certainly glad that they were coming over today, and we have talked, and the events that happened affected them and their constituents as well. And so we know that they're very interested in getting some answers, as we all are. Senator Smith, do you have a comment or anything that you'd like to make?
Just briefly, to let everyone know, we appreciate you taking out time today out of your schedule to be here. We think it's certainly a worthy topic that a lot of people are concerned about, including myself. So we appreciate your engagement. We appreciate each of the individuals that will be coming forward today to speak and testify on this issue in front of us, and look forward to coming out of this meeting today with a pretty good resolution and a pathway forward to give the citizens of the Commonwealth some comfort in knowing that we have put measures in place to address this from happening to them again.
Okay, thank you. As I said earlier, we had heard last year testimony from the person that was over the MISO. And of course, Kentucky is served by PJM and also MISO as far as grid operators. And we were told then that they were expecting some blackouts in the MISO area. Didn't think necessarily that it would be Kentucky, but it was Kentucky. And for someone who's been here starting my 29th year, when I look back, when I first came here, about 93% of Kentucky's electricity was generated from coal. We're probably pretty close now to 70%, maybe just a little under 70%. At that time, we had probably the second lowest utility rates in the nation. Certainly, we were probably the lowest east of the Mississippi River. Today, that is not necessarily the case. We still are competitive, probably in the top 10, but the rates have risen quite a bit. And so the changes that have happened have mostly happened not because of decisions that we made here in the Kentucky General Assembly, but that are coming from Washington, D.C. And we feel that when you have issues that have been predicted as far as brownouts, blackouts, or whatever, and it's predicted that those may continue into the future, may possibly become the norm, then we have to look and say, okay, what do we need to change? What things do we need to look at, and what can the General Assembly do to protect the citizens of Kentucky? And because, it's one thing for us to have a utility that has to cut some people off for a very short period of time in order to manage the grid so that we don't lose the entire grid. But if we actually do lose at some point the entire grid, as it happened in Texas, where, lots of people died as a result of that, and we certainly want to make sure that nothing like that happens in Kentucky if it's within our power to do something about it. So we're going to start today's meeting with a presentation from Jeff Sanderson, the Senior Vice President of Operations at Boardwalk Pipeline, and Buzz Backstorm, Vice President, Marketing and Business Development, LDC and Power Generation from Boardwalk Pipeline Partners. So if you gentlemen would come to the table, we certainly appreciate you being here and appreciate your willingness to answer some questions and give us a little bit of overview as to what may have happened as far as it relates to the availability of natural gas as a fuel to generate electricity.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us today. I am Buzz Backstrom, and Jeff Sanderson's here as well. I want to start by giving you all an overview of our company. Boardwalk Pipelines is a storage and transportation company, and we provide those services. Customers procure gas and put it in our pipelines, and we move it to markets. Texas Gas Transmission Corporation is the company that we'll be talking about today. That is the pipeline that runs through Kentucky that serves markets, and we've been in this market since the late 1940s. Our company was formed in the 1940s. It was by a merger between Kentucky Natural Gas and Memphis Natural Gas. So we've been in the area for a long time. We have a large presence in Owensboro. We have 200 employees in Owensboro in our headquarters there, and we have 300 employees in our Owensboro office. We're going to talk today about some of the events that took place December 23rd through the 25th on our system. But again, we have been providing reliable service to end-use markets in Kentucky for many decades. This is a map of our system. Again, this is the Texas Gas System, and we have 6,000 miles of pipeline, and 1,500 of that is in Kentucky. We also have a storage complex mostly located in Kentucky, an underground storage facility that we'll talk about a little later. Our supply comes from different directions on our pipe. We are a bidirectional pipeline, meaning that we can flow from south to north or north to south. Our supply comes from as far south as the Gulf Coast. We are connected to all of the mid-continent shell or mid-continent basins, so we have supply coming in from the south. We have supply coming in our system from the middle, and then we also have supply coming in from the very north end of our system at Lebanon, Ohio, and that supply comes from the Utica and Marcellus basins. We're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and PHMSA, which is a branch of the Department of Transportation Safety Division. We provide a myriad of services to our customers, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I do want to talk about who our end users are. We have really three types of end users on Texas Gas. We obviously local distribution companies, the LG&Es of the world, the Atmoses of the world, many municipal utilities, 19 LDCs in Kentucky. We also serve 19 power plants directly, 7 of which are in Kentucky, and 4 of which are to companies that are represented here today at LG&E, KU, and TVA. And then the third segment of our end user markets are our industrial customers. Again, we have a long history of providing reliable service to those markets. LDCs, again, goes back to the 1940s, 1950s. The Trimble County power plant that KU has, we've been serving that load for 20 years. There are really 2 types of services that pipelines provide, firm and interruptible. A firm service is where a customer pays us a fixed fee to reserve capacity in our pipeline, and then they call on it when they need it. There are also interruptible customers. That's by nature, it is an interruptible service. It's available when capacity is underutilized or unsubscribed, but firm customers have priority over interruptible service. And then the third type of service, which is a premium service on our system, is a combination of gas transportation and storage, whereas a customer doesn't have to buy every molecule they're going to need for that day. There is a storage complex, again, we'll talk just a minute about where that is, but they can draw gas out of our storage complex when they need it on certain days. LG&E, KU, and TVA both subscribe to those services, those no-notice services. We consider it a premium service and a service really designed not only for local utility companies, but also power plants as well. I mentioned our facilities in Kentucky. Highlighted here are you'll see one star at Slaughters, Kentucky. That is a very critical compressor station that we have on our system that Jeff will be speaking to momentarily. We talked about our storage complex. We have the majority of our storage is in Kentucky. We have a Dixie field in Henderson County. Our Hanson field is in Hopkins County, and our largest complex is our Midland storage complex in Muhlenberg County. We also have denoted here Cane Run and Trimble power plants. Those are the LG&E, KU plants that we serve and that we'll be focusing on in our discussion today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Sanderson to talk about the events of the winter storm and then some of the measures we're taking going forward.
Yes, good afternoon, and I will be talking mainly about the issue we had at the Slaughters compressor station. But first, I did want to show this slide, and this really shows the force of the storm that came in. And it was mentioned it was a predicted storm. It was something that we had prepared for, and I'll go through that in just a few moments. But the big thing was, we saw about a 50-degree temperature drop, violent wind chill factors, along with some precipitation that came in with this storm. It very much mirrored the storm that we had back in 2014. You can see this storm that's on the graph shows in the blue was the Storm Elliott that we had back in December, and the orange shows the 2014 event, and then the purple shows the Winter Storm Uri that was mentioned earlier today. So I would say that I've been in the business for 42 years with the natural gas transmission. I worked in the operations of it. I've worked through the coldest days, the coldest nights, the hottest days, and the hottest nights. And this was the most forceful that came in one afternoon that we'd seen. We did a lot of preparatory work, getting ready for it, and our facilities we did several days before, trying to get ready for this storm. But in my 42 years, I had more disruption to me. We worked through the nights, making sure that our customers were held up with pressure as well as possible. But we did have a blip with a pressure issue, and I will talk a little bit about it. These temperatures here I will mention. These are from our Hardensburg compressor station, which is in Breckenridge County. This is just a few miles from the Slaughter's compressor station that I'll be talking about. So, next slide, please, Buzz. So, just a few things. So, we typically, when a storm comes in, there's several things that we do. One thing that's not mentioned on here, we always get together with our customers before the winter season comes in. The commercial group, the operations group, we get together, talk about how we can work together, be reliable, any kind of thing, any kind of maintenance that we might have, we discuss what the winter looks like. But before this storm and before any storm that comes in, we do take some special steps to make sure that we're winterizing our equipment. And this means, we're adding extra tarps, we're adding heat tape, heat trace, we're adding heat bulbs, draining our low point drains, and actually starting our equipment that might be used during the time of the high demand. So another thing we do is make sure that we pressurize the system to the max. I mean, we've got, there's a lot of gas on our system. Buzz pointed out the storage that we have. So we have a lot of access to gas. The gas was there. The gas was there, the equipment was there, so we got to make sure we get it to the right spots. And as Buzz mentioned, we're a transportation company, so we're hauling it. And if it's an issue with the truck, it's an issue with getting the gas there. So we want to make sure our equipment's ready to go. And then we also, I mentioned here, that we do man our critical compressor stations when a storm like this is coming in. So, we felt like we were ready for it. We had things prepared, but the afternoon when it started falling out, we did all the pressure that we had built up. There was a need. So on the morning of December 23rd, our gas control center called and said we need to get some more horsepower on our Slaughter's compressor station. So we immediately started trying to put the horsepower on, and we ran into icing situations. Not with our pipeline, not with our horsepower, but within some of our small equipment. There was one control valve, an 8-inch control valve, that has to get a permissive start to be able to start this unit, and there was ice in the tubing lines, and there was ice that was also in our controller that operated the valve. So we worked through that day, we worked into the night trying to get this thawed out. We would thaw one thing after the other, and it was finally we had a little bit of damage to the controls of this particular valve. So, and like I said, it wasn't the turbine, it wasn't the pipeline, it was this control equipment that we had. So into the night, that night on it'd be the early morning 24th, we actually were able to get horsepower on and start our deliveries back. In the next, so some steps that we've taken. There's some kind of immediate steps because, we could have a storm like this come in, a few weeks from now. So the winter's not over. We did have, some cold weather come in this week. Some of our locations, the Tennessee, Mississippi, and even up in Kentucky, as our pipeline goes all the way up to Lebanon, we saw some teens and we have seen some ice on much of our system this week. It was not a blip on our system. But there's some immediate steps that we are taking. we're making sure that a valve like this, this particular critical valve, has more than just heat trace and tarps. We're getting shelters spec'd for this that would typically be for shelters that would be in the north and northeast, temperatures where they're seeing below zero routinely. So we're going to equip our stations. We've done a survey from top to bottom, the stations that we need to add some critical protection for this 1 or 2 days out of 5 years. And that's kind of what we looked at with the force of this storm. This was such an unusual event. We're looking like, what can we put in place that would be above and beyond? So we're working to do that. We're fabricating and installing these structures and making sure that we're ready in case another event comes in like this. But I would mention, Buzz talked about reliability, and reliability is something that is super, super important to us because the customers want the gas when they need the gas, and we hang our hat on it. And I mean, it's something that we take very seriously, and if there's something like this that pops up, we don't want to be reactionary. We want to be ahead of it. So we learned from this event. Like I said, events in the past, we didn't have this type of freezing in our control valves. Was it because of the wind chill? Was it because of the precipitation? Was it a combination of all of it? The fact that it came in one afternoon and we saw such drops, that's what it all points to. Our system typically, all of our customers talk about the reliability that we have from top to bottom, from South Texas to Lebanon, Ohio, talk about the reliability that we have. So it's something we take very serious, and this is, when you have 1 8-inch control valve that impacts KU with a pressure issue like that, it was disappointing to us. And I would say it was not only disappointing, but it was a surprise to us because we felt like we had the steps in place, the measures in place to do it, but it did show us a weak spot, and we're taking every effort to address that going forward.
I have a couple of questions, and let me say first before we start that the reason for us to have this committee are really doing the same things you're already doing. You're already trying to find out, what happened and what can we do to prevent it, and we appreciate that. And certainly we appreciate all of the folks out there that are our utility providers. You have some really great employees that are out in weather that most of us certainly wouldn't want to be out in, and so the purpose of this hearing is not to point out anybody or whatever. We're just trying to find some answers, and I know that you're already working on those, and we appreciate that. But let me ask you a question. I guess, I understand that on your system, probably the only people that would actually pay extra to be a premium customer would probably be electric utility generators. Is that correct?
No, we have a mix. I mean, it takes, as Buzz may want to take that question.
Yeah, a local distribution company would subscribe to no-notice service as well, so they can pull from storage on those peak days.
Okay.
But yeah, local distribution companies and power plants.
Right. Okay. So, I see where they would probably do that too. Someone like an Atmos or a municipal or whatever. And I guess in some points they would probably even maybe purchase some power to be put into storage in the summer months or whatever when it's normally available. I would guess.
That's what a local distribution company does. They purchase gas in the summer and store it, and a power generator will bring gas in and out of storage as they need it on a daily basis.
Well, I think it's something that we definitely need to take advantage of when we have the storage there. I guess what I'm wondering is, you mentioned, was it only this one power plant that was hooked up to this particular line that?
No.
I may have missed that.
No, we've actually, and Buzz may have talked about it. We've actually got multiple lines that go through Kentucky from 26-inch to 36-inch. So there's multiple lines going through. And Buzz, I don't think you mentioned about the number of plants that we have actually on our system plus Kentucky.
Yeah, there are 19 plants on our system, 7 in Kentucky. These two plants, the Cane Run and Trimble plants, are on a certain, the issue we have is on this certain section of pipe on the north of Slaughters up into north of the Louisville market.
Okay, so I guess my question is, it's almost like if there's no gas or there's no pressure on the gas, it doesn't do a utility or anyone else a lot of good to have paid for something if it's not available. But in the planning stage, should we look at, and I know that it's very difficult to get pipelines built because, you know, we have a federal government that doesn't seem to like pipelines, even though I think that it's probably the safest, cheapest way to transport natural gas and other petroleum products. But should, when we're planning new generation, we look at how many other facilities are on that particular line before we would grant them the permit to build a plant?
Right, and I'll start with it, Buzz. You may want to jump in, but as mentioned, this particular incident that happened, I mean, the gas was there. I mean, there was with our storage, particularly where our storage is located, it works great for this particular area because we have a vast amount of gas underground stored, ready to go, and we can get it. It comes off of a lateral, comes over to our mainline system there at Slaughters, which pushes it back up this way. So the gas was there. The gas was there waiting to be hauled. I mean, it was a big pile of gas sitting there, and it was we had the horsepower to do it. It was just in this particular event. I mean, and I guess your question is, did you oversubscribe this? Did you oversell this? Do you have, plenty of room on here for these power plants? And the answer is absolutely. But when that valve did not operate to allow this unit to come on, and it kept freezing off, and we ended up, to get into specifics, a boot ruptured on the regulator, so we had to repair all of that. But once we got that complete, and we got the unit back on, then we were able to start hauling the gas out of storage and bringing it back to the north in our system, and in a multiple pipeline setup.
And Mr. Chairman, your point about your question about new facilities, when a potential new facility presents itself, we go through a detailed planning stage to look at our facilities, and then add facilities that are needed to provide that reliable service to that plant like we do the others. And so we don't do it speculatively. We look at a specific project, and we will design our facilities to facilitate that service.
Is there anyone that, I know you said I think you said you're regulated by the,
Federal Energy Regulatory
okay,
Commission. Yeah.
FERC. Is there anyone else that's looking at that to determine, maybe a power plant will be a public service commission or someone else that says, that shouldn't be built because you probably can't get the firm supply that is necessary to especially if you're replacing some other unit, whether it be a coal plant or something else that was definitely there to, supply the need. Is anyone else, or is that just a decision that's made pretty much by your company?
From our perspective, we have to get a certificate of public need from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then on a state level, a utility would certainly go through the Public Service Commission. I'll let them speak to that, but
Yeah.
we do have to get a certificate of public need for an expansion.
Okay. I think Representative Williams has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming out this afternoon to talk with us. One thing I'd just like to ask, if you could maybe educate me a little bit on the process, but this looks a lot similar to the situation in Houston not too many years ago, where they had massive blackouts, and it was cold weather related, had a unique set of weather related issues, which I think we can see kind of similarities with this one. Could you walk me through? And I'm not saying I believe that natural gas does a good job of distributing everything, but what my question is, I guess, is are there unique weaknesses associated with natural gas, especially in the cold weather? I understand it has moisture in it, could get in valves, whatever it may be. Could you kind of help me with that and understand that weakness?
Yeah, and I wouldn't call it a weakness. And I'll go back to the winter storm Uri that we had through Texas, and I was down there, a part of that. Our system performed very, very well. We had no equipment issues. We had no restrictions on our part. To get into it a little deeper, there were some renewable issues that came up, some renewable energy that came up issues. But as far as our transportation service, our equipment was fully up to where it should have been. Our deliveries were fully where they should have been. To your point about the moisture, that is a spot that you have to take special precautions because one valve can stop pressure. And I will say on this event that we're talking about with KU, it wasn't like we did have pressure, but not enough pressure to keep them fully up to where they needed to be. So that was a lack of pressure, but. I would say that natural gas, our turbines are set to run, our reciprocating compressors are set to run well below zero. They're designed for that type of operation. These particular units that we have, they've got them all across the United States, all across Alaska, Canada. These units are very reliable. But when you have a piece of auxiliary equipment like this, that was the surprise. And so you've got to not only winterize your equipment, you've got to winterize some of the auxiliary equipment like a control valve. So I would say, and like I said, I've been in it 42 years, and I've seen, I've not dealt with an issue like this. Now we've had freezes, but usually it's something that's very quick that you can address. And this one just lasted for a number of hours, and that's where the pressure dropped on us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think Senator Smith has some questions or comments, and then we're going to have to move on to the next.
Yeah, I do, and I'll keep it brief. But I was looking at a quote by Michael Weber, who's with Texas University of Texas in Austin, and he had made presented an interview with Bloomberg, and he said, through the variability of wind and solar are well known and discussed a lot, these freezes also show the flimsiness of the gas system in reference to the energy systems across America. And I think that we are seeing a gap here. There's a lot of failure that's happening out there, and we are leaning farther and farther out on this branch, and we're seeing that that some of these technologies are not ready for us to do that. Now, some are. And a lot of this can be infrastructure issues, that we need to have more pipelines, that we need to. Kentucky is a very wealthy state when it comes to natural resources, and it is not in our best interest to march down this failed federal policy of overregulation and blocking pipelines and putting us into a situation where it is now the normal operating procedure for utilities to have rotating blackouts or brownouts. They have to do this. Now, just think about this in the United States of America, and this time we're all of us up here, our entire lives, our connections with our families and work and everything are all electronic and depend on power, and we have found ourselves power poor, where we are telling companies in Kentucky that you're going to be without power, but the good news is we'll let you tell us when. Now, how many Amazons and how many big companies are going to come running here when we don't have power? And it should be a shock to nobody. If you've got an industrial park or you're a community that's out there trying to get industry to come in, and I say this with that fear challenge, when a business shows up, the number one thing they're going to ask you right now is, what is your power rate? And when we tell them what our power rate is, which can be as high in Kentucky as 22 cents per kilowatt hour or above, and then you tell them that they can't get it, we're literally shooting ourselves in the head when I can throw a rock from anywhere from my house in Hazard and hit coal, oil, or gas, or some sort of a natural resource that can be made available for us to stop this nonsense. We need to double down on our industry. I appreciate what you do. I mean, it is a tremendous investment to go out there, be on the ground in boots, and do hard work. It's not easy, and you spend many afternoons standing on tired legs still working, and we appreciate that. We need to have the backbone to back you and stand up to the federal overregulation and help you get the pipelines that you need to have put into place, so that if one regulator fails, you have four more waiting, so we don't have death on the end of that line or somebody freezing to death in the household with somebody that's disabled and 2 or 3 children that are sick. We can do better than that. But I saw, some of the comments here that are very concerning to me. But you had said about, I think, Jeff, that you had the product, you just have to get it to the right spot.
Right.
And so to me, that's an infrastructure issue. That's a logistic problem that we can help with. And when I say help, I'm talking about helping get the permitting and all the tape out of the way that causes a project that could be done in 100 to 200 or 300 days at a reasonable price to turning it to a 15-year, $14 million boondoggle that's no longer in anybody's best interest to do it. And there's no way to absorb that cost back in there that's not going to make everybody in this room pay more for something that should be reliable and affordable. And so I think that we really need to think about what Kentucky can bring to the table. This is Texas, New Jersey, Indiana. You can pick a state, and I will show you a problem with a system that is failing because they're chasing a federal policy by mandate that's failing them. So I think what I see here, and there'll be a lot more testimony, Mr. Chairman, is that Kentucky can no longer allow ourselves to continue to follow the policy that's being set from the federal government and be successful and be the Commonwealth that we should be and that the people in this room deserve us to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
One comment on that. So I would say, when we talk about Texas, I think it all goes back to where the end user nominates their gas from. So, what source are they getting it from? And in the Kentucky issue, the Texas issue, there's multiple places you can get gas, just like on our system. We're tied to production, pretty much all over the United States. We can get gas from a lot of different sources, but where does the customer buy their gas from for us to transport it? So that's a key part of it. But I think the super key part of it here, of what we're talking about, is the storage. Because here again, you're not held by production. A lot of what Texas problems was production oriented. But if it's in storage, they're earmarked. Now, going back, we had it in storage, but was it one valve, one device that kept you? Was it a flat tire on that particular truck that kept it from making that delivery that day? That's kind of what we're looking at. So you just got to make sure you got new tires on. You've got the very best tires on because you're going to be transporting. But you make a really good point about the fact that where you source your gas from, is that reliable? Because we're moving it. And storage is one of the biggest assets and one of the biggest things that our industry is going to need to stand behind, because there's a lot of capability with the storage, and particularly this area.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to follow up. As a pilot, one of the things that I always keep in the back of my mind when I'm flying is what's called 2 mistakes high. I want to be high enough that I can make 2 mistakes and still come out of it. Same thing with this system here. We need to be thinking about storage and the other aspects that go into getting this product to turn into electricity to the gasifier, get it going. And that can be coupled with having coal and things already on site and making sure that those stockpiles are available, where if something fails, we are 2 mistakes high, that there will not be somebody at the end of that line and a family huddled together with some sort of an outdoor heating buddy in their house with just a terrible situation to be in. I mean, in my area, every single winter, as soon as the first cold snap happens down in eastern Kentucky, some house trailer burns up with some woman who's worked 2 jobs and 3 or 4 children in there, and it happens every single year of my life. And when we get down there, some old kerosene heater or some substandard something they put in an old house just to simply stay warm. Now that is a travesty. So I do encourage us to support the industry, the people that are out there with the boots on actually doing it. And in most cases, it's a get the hell out of your way. But we should be providing you with the infrastructure that needs to be put down there. And we need to call this exactly what this is. This is has been a disaster, and we need to make sure that the people know we're going to do something about it.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to testify today. Next, we're going to have a presentation about the planned electric service outages resulting from the December 2022 winter's weather, and it's going to be TBA. I think Aaron Melinda, Senior Vice President, and Dan Pratt, I think. Gentlemen, welcome. Glad to have you here today, and you may proceed.
Tennessee Valley Authority was established in 1933 with the primary mission of improving standards of living for the folks that live in the valley. We serve a 7-state region, 14 local power companies right here in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we take that mission that was established in 33 very seriously today as well. We have 3 components of that mission: energy, low cost, reliable energy to our constituents; environment. We manage a large river system and about 290,000 acres of land and public property; and economic development, probably the real mission, which is creating jobs and capital investment in the areas that we live. Through those 3 E's, we have established a fleet. So our fleet is, first, we operate the 3rd largest nuclear fleet in the nation. We have the 2nd largest transmission system in the nation, the 5th largest system of rivers and dams, and those make up a diverse fleet for us that also includes coal generation, natural gas generation, solar, wind. That diversity of assets we think of as energy security. So foundational to our mission are those underlying assets, and imperative to our mission is economic development and enticing industries into the valley that stimulate jobs and capital investment. So I'm here today to talk about Winter Storm Elliott. I'm going to talk about the events as they occurred, the facts as we know them, and the actions that we've taken to ensure that this type of event does not occur again. First, the basis for my presentation is around reserve. So in the utility industry, we maintain a level of reserve. We at TVA establish a 25% reserve for winter capacity. Now what that means is there are some inherent risks to our business, 3 in particular. There's weather risk, there is load risk, meaning consumer demand risk, and there is the risk of unavailability of assets. So we, through the years, have established a practice of 25% of reserves as we go into events to mitigate those risks. So I'm going to talk through each of those. First, weather. What you can see here on the map is the morning of the 23rd. This is the weather system that sat across the eastern United States. If you can see them, the numbers give you an indication of deviation from normal. So you can see in the Valley region, in particular in the Kentucky region, about 38 degrees from what we would expect normal to be in this December timeframe. Important here, we did not set any record low temperatures. So this wasn't a record low temperature kind of event. They were extreme lows, but our operational assets have functioned properly at these temperatures in the past. What was unique about this weather event was the rapid drop in temperature. So from 0100 to 0600 on the 23rd, we went from a system average temperature of 45 degrees to 5 degrees. The change in weather, so again, across that same time period, we went from cool and raining to very cold and very windy. And then the third, which you can see from this illustration, the breadth of this system. And that really matters when you think about all of our systems in the Eastern Interconnect are connected. So we have the opportunity to lean on our peers in extreme events, bring power in, sell power out as our neighbors need it. And the breadth of this system had an impact on that. So weather first. Second, talked about consumer demand. And I think this one, I was actually a bit surprised when I saw what an anomaly this was in consumer demand. I'll orient you to the slide here. On the y-axis, we have total megawatts that we serve across the system. Across the bottom, you can see it goes from the 1st of December to the 15th of January. And each of the different colored lines represent the actual consumer demand that we've seen across that period in the last 10 years. And what jumps out clearly is the orange box. This is the demand during that December 23rd and 24th period. We've worked with some of our neighboring peers on the forecast during that period. So we were about 10% off on what we expected the actual demand to be. And as we've looked into it, what we've learned is we have a pretty heavy saturation of water or heat pumps on our system for heating purposes. Well, those heat pumps, say across a 4-day period, would have just sort of kept up with the dropping temperature had it occurred in that kind of time frame. But when it occurs across such a short time frame, what a heat pump does is it's got logic in it that says if I see a 4-degree difference between set point and what I'm driving to, it automatically kicks on auxiliary heat. And so what happened at this period of time was millions of heat pumps across the system kicked on auxiliary heat at the same time and drove the load much higher than we expected. So some unexpected weather, some change in consumer demand that we had not anticipated, and then some of this led to the third component that we keep reserves in place for, and that's availability of generation. So outlined in blue here is the territory that we serve in the Tennessee Valley. Each of the highlighted icons is a power plant that we lost some availability to during this event due to freezing related issues. You can see a number of icons out there that aren't highlighted. Those are the other plants on our system. So a lot was done to ensure that they stayed in operation through this event. But all in total, we lost about 20% of our available generation on the morning of the 23rd. And really, that's the story of the event for us and what led us to the point that we had to call on our local power companies to curb 5% of their consumption on the 23rd for about a 2-hour period, and then 10% of their consumption for about a 5-hour period on the 24th in order to maintain grid stability. So again, 3 things here: a change in weather that we had not anticipated the impact of, a consumer demand component that led to higher loads than were anticipated, and then a loss of generation that put us in a position where we had eroded that 25% of reserves and had to rely on our local power companies to reduce some of their consumption. This is just a view that illustrates the impact that this system had on the entire eastern United States. So some different colors here. The light yellow sort of across mid-America. This is the Southwest Power Pool and ERCOT, which serves Texas. Some slightly higher temperatures in this area, but those areas experienced challenges to that 25% of reserves that I mentioned. In the MISO system, they were utilizing some of their reserves during this event, but had not fully depleted them. In the PJM system to our north, they had fully depleted their reserves and had called back some sales that they had made to us, which is fully within their rights. But we had purchased power from them in order to try to cover the peak, especially on that second day. And because the cold had set across their system in a similar fashion and affected their generation in a similar fashion, they called those sales back. You can see TVA, and then to our east, primarily the Carolinas, which is served by Duke, Dominion, and Santee Cooper. We were all in the same condition where we had fully exhausted reserves and were relying on distribution level consumption reductions. Finally, we are conducting a thorough after-action review. So first piece of this I want to mention is immediate actions. So following the event, we had identified through our plant operators 240 actions that came out of those power plant losses due to freezing issues. As of last week, 100% of those actions have been completed. So similar to the previous presentation, additional heat trace, insulation, more robust structures that have been put in place. These are near-term actions that we've taken that ensure that if we had this type of event next week, it would not occur in a similar fashion. We are in the after-action review now working on what are the longer-term actions. So, you know, the term we've been using, we need to Minnesota-proof some of these plants, which has some engineering implications that we've got to think through thoroughly, because if you Minnesota-proof a plant, you got to think about how it operates in the summer as well. So working through that engineering is going to take a little bit more time, but that's certainly the direction that we're moving so that we can ensure this doesn't occur. Couple important pieces of this. We've involved our customers in this after-action review, so they are formally involved. We've also established what we're calling a blue ribbon panel. It's comprised of some industry experts, Joy Ditto, who is the CEO of American Public Power Association, Mike Howard, who's the former CEO of EPRI, which is a research group that's recognized in the industry, and former Senator Bob Corker. We expect to have some results ready to publish from this in the March timeframe, and are certainly taking this event very seriously. I think, you know, if there is a silver lining here, it has illustrated for us and the broader constituency the value and importance of reliability. So we balance four things. We balance reliability, resiliency, affordability, and sustainability. But I think it's highlighted that reliability has to continue to be the number one thing that we focus on. So that is the end of my prepared remarks. Certainly open to questions.
Let me stop you here, and I've got about 5 members that want to ask some questions, and then we'll allow them to ask, and then I will proceed. So I think Representative Miles has a question.
I actually had one for the previous, but I do have one for here too, so I'll go ahead and ask. We continue to have groups come and present in front of our committee, and the common theme that we continue to hear is we are not ready to transition to reliable, affordable energy in other sources that are being forced from the federal level. So I have visited your all's plan as far as your nuclear and some of those items. But as far as this specific issue that we're looking at today is a huge concern. And can you all elaborate on how the federal government, or even at the state level for that matter, if there is a stumbling block, whether it be your financial investment opportunities, whatever that may be, that is preventing us to make sure that we have affordable, sustainable moving forward? We can't depend on a valve. We can't depend on, we're going to have something in place, because that is what we're, I mean, it's obvious. And you would not be in front of this committee unless December had happened. I think you're very well aware of that. So can you all elaborate on what's standing in the way?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly concur with your sentiment on the need to be disciplined and deliberate as we move through any transition. And so one thing I'll point out, there are 2 drivers to some transition in energy right now, right? One driver is we have some aging power plants that are end of life. We've got to work them off the system, and we've got to figure out what are the most reliable ways to replace those power plants. And then there is a growing market demand for sustainable products. So I'll say the way we view this at TVA is, you know, back to energy security. We've got to have a diverse mix of assets. We have consumer demand that is interested in sustainable products. So let's do that in conjunction with the existing fleet of assets that we have that are designed to maintain first reliability, resiliency, affordability, and then meet market demand in terms of sustainability. So I don't believe there's anything in our way right now of doing this effectively other than being very disciplined and deliberate and making sure that we are keeping those priorities in those orders.
Senator Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was also for the previous presenters as well, but I do have two questions. You mentioned about the facilities that went offline that had problems. What was the energy mix of those? Nuclear, coal, renewables. What was the mixture on those? And did any particular one weather the storm better or worse?
Yeah, so we had about 7,000 megawatts of generation that went offline. 2,600 megawatts of that was coal generation, and the balance of it was natural gas generation. The other side of that, nuclear, 100% available through this event, hydro, 100% available through this event, and many of the newer natural gas plants, 100% available through this event. The primary driver on both losses of generation were freezing issues on sensing lines, and what we had previously established as the design criteria for how these plants operated wasn't sufficient for that rapid drop in temperature. So it's heating was in place, insulation was in place, but that rapid drop in temperature is what overwhelmed it, and that's what we've learned from this event, and we have to fix it.
Right. And just a quick follow-up, your answer to Representative Miles, you said there's a growing market demand for renewables, I guess. Mm-hmm. You really think that's a growing market demand or a growing political demand?
So I'll tell you from our perspective, we are building renewables to meet a market demand. You know, we have a growing number of industrial customers, commercial customers, and even residential customers that are asking for some of these renewable products and programs. Mm-hmm. So what we are doing on our system to build out renewables is not to meet any kind of federal or state standard. It's for the purpose of serving those market needs.
None at all.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Let me follow up on that. You say that there's a huge demand from the market out there as far as large companies or whatever, and that may be true. But why do you think that it's in the best interest of the ratepayers of Kentucky to pay for that? Now, if these large corporations want to invest in wind and solar, have at it. That's between you and your stockholders. But why should TVA customers pay because you feel like you have to provide someone in industry who's not willing to pay themselves? They want you to make that investment, and then they want you to pass that on to your customers. Why does TVA feel like that's part of your mission statement?
That is not a part of our mission statement. I couldn't agree with you more. We are not putting a single renewable on the system that has a premium that is not being paid by one of those industrials or commercials or residential customers. So anything that we're putting on the system, they are paying the cost above what a normal piece of generation for us to build would be. We are not putting this on the backs of the native ratepayers.
As they should. Thank you. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Gooch and Chairman Smith. And Mr. Chairman, I couldn't agree with you more on your last comments, and I want to allude to that just a little bit if you've got just a minute. And I don't want to take up a lot of a lot of the committee's time, but it really bothers me in the last few months when I read about more power plants, coal-generated power plants being shut down, and then we hear today that we have issues, but nobody yet has said in the next 6 months, a year, this is our game plan to get to where we need to be as far as electric and the grid. But yet we keep hearing about all these things that we're going to keep plugging into it, such as cars and more renewable energies. And I'm not a believer in thinking that we can supply all this with windmills. It sickens me to think about our future of getting away from the fossil, mostly in my district, in my area, and us not having a say in it, that we can't come here and say anything. So in researching for the committee meeting today, I seen that you were in the nuclear side. So I came up with a question that I had for you to kind of get you to elaborate on it. that'll give you a chance to tell us. What would you consider to be the most reasonable and effective base load power for the future that would be considered carbon neutral? And in asking that, it kind of alludes to what the chairman brought up in the last discussion, and that is, what is your future plans as far as building out? What can we expect here in Kentucky since they've already threw the knife at us in the coal? What is your game plan to give us a cost-efficient electric to replace it with, and not just tell us that we're going to have to all start putting windmills up? I mean, what is the TVA's game? And I respect your company very much. They're very effective in my area and been there for years, and I appreciate you. But I want to hear your perspective on what your game plan is and what your business model looks like in replacing what we're losing, and that is the fossil end of it.
Yep, certainly. So I'll be very brief, but a bit of history that leads us to now. So in our industry, across the industry, and I'll speak specifically for TVA, period of time from 2010 to 2020 that we effectively had zero growth. During that period of time, we consolidated some assets. We worked on our balance sheet. We reduced our debt. Coming into the pandemic, we saw about a 1.5% drop in sales. Year 2 of the pandemic, we saw a 2% increase in sales. Year 3, a 3% increase in sales, which I think leads specifically to the comment that you made. We are seeing electrification happening right before our eyes, and I think it's going to happen more. So our plan for ensuring reliable, resilient, affordable, sustainable fleet is what you will see from us is building a significant amount of natural gas between now and the end of the decade. Right now, we are working on our Clinch River site. So it's a site that's been permitted for a new nuclear facility, referred to as a small modular reactor. A small modular reactor is smaller in footprint to a traditional nuclear site and has a great deal of innovation in the construction. And that's really important because probably what you've seen or what you've read about in nuclear construction is there tends to be overruns, there tends to be schedule delays. This innovation in the construction piece is what we see as integral to reviving the nuclear industry. And specifically to your first question, long-term nuclear has to be a huge component to serve the customers that we serve. It's region specific. So you talk about regions out west, you talk about regions to the north, they may have different solutions. But for our region to support heavy industry and the businesses and jobs that we have, we're going to need nuclear in our future.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it Mr. Melda or Mr. Pratt? I don't know which one's which.
Melda's over here,
Melda,
but
all
you can
right.
ask Pratt a question.
Well, it's for either one of you, so feel free to jump in, whoever's got the answer. The chairman sort of asked part of one of the questions that I had here. If the market is what's driving your decision making, I'm not sure what part of the market told you shutting down coal was the best way to get at what you need. Because it sounds like, based on my conversations with your staff before now and your testimony today, you underestimated the demand, and then you didn't have enough headroom. You were already down a little bit because of the freezing problem at one of the other facilities, at least in our neck of the woods in West Kentucky, and I represent Muhlenberg County and Christian County and Caldwell County. So you had a setup there that left you without enough headroom on energy generation space that you'd have had plenty of energy for if you hadn't shut down coal operations in Muhlenberg County or elsewhere in the system. Is it accurate that you all were buying power that day from that MISO group on the 23rd?
We were buying power from, several markets on the 23rd. That's correct.
Is it true that rate, because you were buying it that day based on the need, was several multiples higher than it ordinarily would have been?
That is correct.
You want to tell us what that amount is and what it normally would have been?
So I'll give you a pretty close
ballpark
average,
is fine.
Yeah, average power sales probably would be in the $50 per megawatt hour range. We were getting up into the $150 a megawatt hour range.
When you purchased it that day?
That's correct.
I wasn't aware of the blue ribbon panel that you've got. I'd ask you to put somebody from Muhlenberg County on it, or pick another rural county, a homeowner, a ratepayer, or someone from the fiscal court. I'm glad you've got the learned experts you've got, but I think it'd be wise for TVA to hear from people that you actually affected. I wanted to know, and I still don't have an answer to this question, whether or not TVA can even honor its obligation to provide power, because demand isn't going to go down. You've explained it away today, and I'm going to say this, you didn't put it in these words, but all I heard was blaming the circumstance and blaming ratepayers and heat pumps that they've installed for unexpectedly high demand. But it makes me worried about whether or not TVA can even provide power down the road. I'm 42. I don't remember a time when we've ever had rolling blackouts. But I was in my attic babysitting a torpedo shop heater on my vinyl drain line on my HVAC system, which was frozen solid, which was plugged into the wall, the torpedo heater was, when everything went out. That's how I learned about the rolling blackouts that you all apparently had in the manual for some time. I guess I'm worried about whether or not you can provide power down the road, especially since you continue to close coal. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the TVA network, your system, is about to shut down more coal-producing plants in the next year or two. What market forces have driven that? Because every time you come up here, you've heard from a panel that pretty universally supports coal, and we represent constituencies that pretty universally depend on coal, and it makes our power among the cheapest in the country. Why do we keep shutting down coal? A. B, you didn't mention one thing, Mr. Melda, not one time, why you didn't communicate, or why not you, but TVA didn't communicate with ratepayers, all of us who pay the bill, why rolling blackouts was even an option on the table. Why was that even contemplated as a potential thing we might need to rely on? 3, are we going to start seeing blackouts more often? And 4, what would it take to turn coal plants back on? What's required for TVA to reverse course? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. First, I'll talk about the shutdown of coal that's gone on thus far. And I mentioned it in the last answer. Through that period that we had effectively zero sales growth, the 2010 through 2020, we were consolidating assets. The oldest assets that we have on the system are the coal assets. So several of those got shut down. And I will say, so I spent 6 years of my life in Muhlenberg County as the plant manager of the Paradise plant. And it hurts me when I saw the cooling towers drop a few weeks ago. Great people there, a great community.
Turn it back on, Mr. Melda.
Couldn't say more about it. So we have reduced some coal plants during that period of time. We are building these natural gas plants, so that's what's filling in the need that we're seeing in the increased consumption. On the communication side, I will say we failed at that. We could have done a much better job of communicating. The fact is, this is the first time that we've ever in our history needed to use these curtailments at the distribution level. Internally, we drill on them. We drill on them with our local power companies. We know that they're there as a last step that you take before you go to kind of deeper into curtailment process. But we had not done a good job of communicating that and didn't have a good communication system in place real time such that we could give folks notice that this was coming. So that is absolutely something that's in the after action review that we have to solve. And did you want to hit the one on?
Yeah, I'd just add one thing, mainly to your comment on the blue ribbon panel. So I did want to emphasize, I think Mr. Milda mentioned it before, we do have 10 of our local power companies, including a representative from Pennyrile RECC from Kentucky, and 2 of the associations that represent all local power companies and are directly served customers. And they're actually on the working group of the after action review. So we want to make sure that representation of those even closer to the end use customer is certainly part of that. One of the main issues for dialogue is improving communications. Are there technology, are there tools that we can put in place? Is there a way to get better preparation, better advance notice, better real-time communications during an event? So as Aaron just said, that's very much part of the after-action review. And I'll just end by saying again our appreciation to the 15 local power companies that serve Kentucky and the 153 that cover the 7-state region, because they were essential to executing on a portion of our emergency load curtailment program that had actually never been exercised before. Without their support, without their workers being out in the cold to operate breakers and take load off, then we would have even further jeopardized reliability of the broader system. So our appreciation to local power companies for their partnership.
And I think the last question was on returning coal to service. So in the event that you have a coal facility that has been retired, formally retired, from a TVA standpoint, it would take two different actions. It would take a board action to authorize taking that out of retirement. The second action that you'd have to go through is an environmental action that's called a new source review. So you effectively have to assume that this is a new plant that you're putting back on. You'd have to get air, water, and waste permits for that unit again.
Yeah, and let's say new source review is the reason you couldn't make upgrades to that plant in the first place. It's all part of the federal government. Any more questions, Senator?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Senator Smith and then Representative Blanton.
Yeah, and I'll be quick. We have a lot of members that have asked, how we got here, and I'll tell you, just like Chairman Gooch said, I mean, this came about by the federal government cap and trade getting very aggressive and punishing our utilities for every megawatt of power generated by coal. And so it was a showdown of legal fees and being constantly bombarded with threats from the federal government, almost at every angle, until the utilities had to cave in and start following a policy in order to keep under the radar of having the feds drop the hammer on you. And that's how we got here. That's how the Big Sandy got closed out there when it didn't make good sense. But how do you force people into buying something doesn't make sense for them to purchase it? Well, you have to drive the cost of everything else up. So they drove the cost of coal up. And even still at the Henry Hub, they couldn't drive it under because it was so competitive. So then they had to kill it altogether. So they made a lot of these power companies retire these fleets. And now what's happening is, look what's happening in Germany right now. And you're very aware, and I know, they have doubled down. They are not going to wind up being energy poor. They have figured out that the countries with power right now, and I mean affordable power, are the countries that are going to be ruling and making the decisions in the next 20 years going forward. Same thing with Great Britain. They opened the first mine back on over 100 years, and they're doubling down on coal. Kentucky should be no different. We should be doubling down on something we know has historically worked for us. The power rates in our lifetime have been, anywhere between 2 to 4 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour, some of the most effective in the country. And right now, for most industrial parks, it's between 18 to 22 cents per kilowatt hour and above. How many industries out there can absorb, any tech industry that can possibly stand to pay higher than Hawaii or Alaska or New York and then Kentucky? So it's a disaster, a policy that's been affected by the government pushing a policy on the utilities, and the utilities being forced to retire things that don't make a lot of sense for them, but you either have to do that or you get regulated out of business. So for those of you that have not been here that long, that's exactly how we got here. And the cap and trade game and the punishments that go with it try to destroy something that was very effective and efficient and reliable. And I mean, I'm a supporter of all the above, but coal doesn't have problems on those deliveries. If it's sitting on the yard and you have a 6-month supply of it, you're going to have 6 months of power going to these families, and they're going to have heat, and they're going to have their air conditioning work when they need it, and you're not going to have rolling brownouts and blackouts. That's just the truth of it. And we never had those in Kentucky when I grew up. We had a lot of power and a lot of it when we needed it. And now I'm paying more than I've ever paid in my lifetime and can't even get it. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. We've got Representative Blanton, Johnson, Gentry, Burke, White, and Turner. So I'm going to let them ask questions, and then we'll go to Mr. Pratt. That's about all we have time for. So, Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief. My questions require, for the most part, right here, Mr. Pratt in front, require pretty much one answer responses. reliable, most reliable? Coal, renewables?
Coal.
Cost efficient? Coal, renewables?
You got to put cost efficient with reliable for me to answer at coal.
Okay, thank you. And reminding you what you said your all's mission was: affordable rates, reliability, but you're going more towards renewables, away from coal. That's more cost efficient, that's more reliable. That's contrary to your mission statement. It's not you all. I'm not blaming TVA, okay? I want you to understand. This is a nationwide thing. Something I never thought we would see in Kentucky: brownouts, blackouts. Shut down a TVA plant. Was that a reliability decision or a financial decision?
The coal plant that was shut down in Muhlenberg County, that was a financial decision.
Sure it was. Wasn't reliability to your customers. You sit here and you've told this committee that the whole purpose in moving to more renewables was it was a demand by your customers. So maybe I should sit here and call on all the people in your all's area to start writing, calling you all to show where their support lies, because apparently that plays a role in your all's decision making. And I think you're going to find that most of your customers aren't about the renewables. They're about when that temperature does drop, to be able to have heat because their elderly parents need to be cared for. Their children need heat. This is not the worst weather we've had in Kentucky, by far. By far. But this has become one of the most tragic situations that we as humans have put ourselves in. We have put ourselves in this position. Make no mistake about it. Because we've listened to certain people. And those people who don't agree with those people, we've purposely shut them out. We shut them down. We begin to call them names. To say that there's not coal availability, that's not true at all. You come to my region, East Kentucky, the reason coal is not being mined is not because it's not available. It's because our federal government, and in some means over the years our state government, has forced so many regulations on the coal industry it's made it impossible for them to mine coal. They've made it impossible. And that's driven up the cost. We've driven up the rate cost for people. We talk about as government how we want to help poor people all the time. But we turn around and we give monopolies to utilities to let them charge whatever they want so they can listen to those who are crying the loudest. Another variable that you did not mention, sir, when you talked about the variables that had changed, and that variable was this time, the change was you had less use of coal when this hit. You didn't talk about that. If you'd had that, we wouldn't be sitting here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I guess I'll just ditto what you just heard. That was a lot of my question. But I will ask this. With these customers who are demanding / requesting whatever term you want to use that you go to renewables and are paying for it, I'd like some more details on that. I'd like to know who they are and what your responses have been to those requests / demands / whatever term you want. I'd like to know who it is that thinks the renewables are more important than the reliability of the entire region that you serve. If you could get that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
And then very quickly, Mr. Chairman, Leader Miles asked the question of what roadblocks you see in the way that we might be able to help with. I would like the gentleman from Texas Gas, Buzz, Jeff, if you guys could at some point either, if we have time before we adjourn or after adjournment, answer that same question for us, if you could. You know, we can, however we can get it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, guys, for being here. And this is my first day on this committee. It's had no idea I was going to get into a natural gas and coal fight here. Just a couple of simple questions, just overview your presentation, if you don't mind. I listened to both of the presenters today, and there seemed to be a lot of talking about the weather system that came in, and not necessarily the temperature, but the strength and intensity of the storm. Is that something that happens very often here? I guess that was a pretty rare event.
So the two things that were rare was the rapid drop in temperature and the breadth of the system, so the size that it covered.
So if you were a meteorologist or a scientist, you would say extreme low pressure system, it was a very intense storm. Is that correct? Or
Yes,
you
sir.
may not know the answer to
I
that.
believe that's correct.
Okay. Seems to be getting a lot more common these days, these intense storms that we're dealing with. We dealt with F4 tornadoes in western Kentucky that stayed on the ground forever. We dealt with floods that are outrageous in East Kentucky. It's hard to turn on a television set within 30 days, and we're talking about fires and wildfires and droughts and everything else that is so excessive we haven't seen. We're dealing with things that we haven't dealt with in a really long time, or ever, and things are changing. There's a reason we're trying to move away from more fossil fuels. You may disagree with that, but there is another side of the story, which I can't get into here today. Perhaps this General Assembly needs to start an environmental caucus to actually have the other side heard a little bit, and we can all find out what the truth is and what might be a little bit of myth out there. Perhaps it should be started by scientists, maybe even a geologist. Not many of us around here, but I ought to give that some thought. But my simple question to you, and I'll be done, I'm sorry here. If the same type of storm happened in 3 weeks, should we expect the same kind of result? Or is there anything you've learned or any changes that you've made that may have minimized that from happening again, like we've seen?
Yeah, so I can tell you that immediately following the event, after the plants were secured, the plant personnel went through and listed all of their lessons learned, all the actions that they took to try to mitigate some of the circumstances. We captured all of those, had 247 actions that were generated. All of those actions are complete to date. So mitigation has been put in place to absolutely minimize the potential that this could happen tomorrow.
So what I'm hearing is you guys have done what you can do, at least from a short-term standpoint. Do we have any infrastructure issues, in your opinion, that need to be addressed moving forward? Because we're going to get these storms more often. I
Yes.
think we know that.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that at all a little bit?
I can. Yeah, so as you said, short-term actions have been taken. So temporary things have been put in place to mitigate the specific event that we saw. For extreme events in general, this is part of this after-action review for us, is looking at the underlying engineering design basis that these plants were constructed under and determining, do we have the right breadth of potential situations identified that could occur, and that the design be changed such that we can be more robust in the future. So that's the longer term action. You know, that's probably a year, 18 months of work to get us in a position where we could say the design basis has been changed, and we've been very thoughtful and deliberate in changing the operation of our owned and operated assets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming to speak before the committee today. I will be brief. I have 2 questions that relate to the specific event relating to the storm. The first is, when I look at the map that you've provided of negative impacts to the electric supply, you have all the different kinds of generation, and you're showing which ones were unavailable. The ones that I see that are highlighted, it appears to be 100% of the coal plants. Is that correct?
There was some impact to each of the coal sites, that's correct. We only had one that took a sustained loss of generation.
Okay. And then it looks like a large percentage, more than 50% of the natural gas plants. Is that right?
Yeah, 42% of the natural gas plants had some impact.
Okay. But your hydro plants, your nuclear plants, those remained up and running. Is that right?
100% available.
So when Mr. Representative Blanton was questioning you about the reliability of coal, doesn't this incident seem to undermine your statement that it is the most reliable.
I think the question is it more reliable than renewables? And yes, that is true. Renewables add a different dynamic to a power system than what a rotating resource does.
Okay. So when we purchased, or when TVA purchased from MISO, they were drawing off renewable sources, weren't they? We were purchasing wind power, I think, from them. Is that right?
So we make a market purchase. It's not tied to a specific asset. So it's what's in their market.
But their market is very diversified. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And does include wind?
It does, yes.
Okay. My last thing I'd just like to say is I believe that you have lots of customers who are asking for renewable. I'm sure that that's true. And Kentucky is, we're a coal-friendly state. It's a major resource here. So it's quite possible that you're going to hear very varied opinions. But I just wanted to say that I believe you, and my constituents in the 75th District, they're absolutely the kind of people who are saying we want more renewable energy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have to make a comment. Maybe part of my age, but you if you were over 50 in here, you remember back in the 70s when it was the return of the ice age. We had snowmobiles in Hazard. We had deep snows for 4 or 5 years there, and the big weather shift pattern that came through here. And I can remember it being colder than I've ever been cold in my life, but we were never without power. So a lot of these other technologies that have popped in here now, they're fighting for the market, and you all have to use them, because if you don't, the federal government's going to price them out and look at coal with all the fines and what you're going to have to pay to use it, compared to one of these other ones that are shoved down your all's throat, whether you like them or not. You still have to take them and parcel them out to the public. We had 4 cents per kilowatt rate in the 70s in there with some of the worst storms that have ever hit our region, and we never were without power, like what we're seeing now. So for whatever this new committee, we're going to put scientists on, stuff like that. You don't have to be a scientist to have lived through the 70s and remember what our power grid looked like then, what we paid then, and that it was based upon coal. And the thing about being reliable is that coal can have 6 months supply right there next to the power plant that you can walk out and measure every day, and there's not going to be 4 or 5 days without wind that's going to affect it. There's not going to be days without sun that's going to affect it where it's cloudy. You're not going to have to worry about a pipeline breaking, because it will be right there. Now, I don't know how you can get more reliable than that, but anyhow, we know how a lot of you utilities feel the same way we do. You just can't say it. And that's sad, because that's government policy. It's in the way, and it's hurting people in Kentucky. And hopefully this hearing today will help us do more about changing that and getting you also support that in return could help the people. So thank you.
Well, and that was probably at a time, Senator, when we didn't use natural gas to generate electricity. It was considered too valuable a fuel to use to generate electricity with. So there was probably no generation from natural gas. Representative White?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I toured the Kentucky Power plant in Louisa the other day, and they went from 100% coal to natural gas, and took the coal production section out. Is it feasible or practical to keep coal available at some of these plants and not do away with them, but keep them on a standby, or keep them where they can be activated again instead of going to nuclear or some other type of energy? Is it even practical to do that? But like Louisa is sitting right there at the heart of the coal country, and to me, it would make sense to keep that in place and maybe be able to use that along with natural gas, or if that's even possible.
Yeah, so is the question, is it feasible to run a plant off of either coal or natural gas?
Or keep coal as a standby with natural gas?
Yes, that is possible.
And would that be cost prohibitive, or?
There would be a cost component to it, yeah.
Would not be a good route to go? to keep some coal available, and how are they? What's the plans on the coal operating plants that's still in operation? Are they planning on shutting all of them down eventually, or?
In the TVA system?
Yes.
Yeah, so right now we don't have committed dates on all of the coal plants, but there is a planning horizon for the remaining 6,700 megawatts of coal facilities that we have on the system, which takes you out into the middle 30s.
Okay. So if a plant goes to natural gas, then will they automatically be taking the coal section out?
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it possible to keep that available?
It is possible. It tends to be a higher cost unit if you try to use both fuels at the same site.
And what if you just use one or the other, but had one of them available all the time?
So there's different technologies in the thermal component that takes, coal energy and turns it into steam versus the component that turns natural gas energy into steam. Those are separate components. So you'd set up some sort of scenario where you had multiple components, and that's where the cost difference would come in.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Senator Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I don't care who answers, whoever's appropriate. As I understand it, the sole basis for shutting down the coal tipple was based upon TVA's decision to look at their records and say, well, we don't have an increase in request for usage, so that justifies us reducing our assets, basically, by doing something. Is that what you said earlier, as I understood it?
Yes.
So if I ask you to go back to before the 77 winter that we had, it was the terrible one here when I was in law school, from then up to look at your records, that it would show sometime that you've done something like that to justify doing away with assets, just not looking out for changes in the future, even though we see that the winters are worse, the storms are worse now and have been for the last 10 years. You're wanting us as a body here to believe that that was the sole justification for doing this? That there's a reduction in requests for electricity? That you all tore down the Muhlenberg plant?
So it was a financial decision on the Muhlenberg plant because we had at that time an excess of supply. So we looked at the oldest assets and what their design life was.
That's what my real question is, but if you go back to 77 and look at your records, did you do that then, or did you expect that you were going to have a change in the weather that was going to increase that, whether people needed it at that time or not, just like what we're having now in this bad weather all over? I remember, where was it, out in Minnesota, that one sole coal plant's what saved that state from getting froze up some years ago. Don't you all ever plan for something like that?
Yes, sir, we do.
Well, but tearing down a plant, ain't that just the opposite? Because now, look what happened. You did blackouts, brownouts if you want to call them, but you shut electricity down to people without notice, as I understand it, whether they had a heart machine hooked up to them or a lung transplant that they were breathing. Death didn't mean anything to you all. It was them dollars that you wanted to shut that plant down. Did you have any way of notifying these people you're going to shut down their electricity?
No, sir, we did not.
Is there any reason you can't do it, like one of those alerts that I get all the time on my cell phone that somebody's took a kid somewhere in Tennessee or Indiana? Can't you set something up like that to protect the public?
Yes, sir, we absolutely
But you
can.
hadn't planned that when you shut down that plant, had you?
We did not have that communication in place at that time.
I said you didn't plan on that kind of thing for emergency when you shut down that plant. You just did away with emergency type stuff for power that you needed, like you had to have this time when you determined that it was, we're not using it, so we'll tear it down.
Well, we retained a level of reserves through our entire history.
Okay. I also heard previously that the gas people store gas. Is that to private companies, or do you know that you all end up buying?
I think there's a mix. It'd probably be better answered by the gas companies. But for TVA, we have some storage facilities that sit in the valley footprint that are not TVA owned, but we essentially rent capacity in those storage facilities.
but you have that contract directly with them so that the price that you pay is, there's not a middleman in between you and them.
That's correct.
I heard you say earlier, though, that you paid about 3 times, though, for the price of something that you had to buy
Power.
that got passed on to us individual customers.
Yes, sir.
And that's for the benefit of corporations and everybody in government and everybody else that benefits from it, correct? Or does electricity get passed on, that price gets passed on to everybody?
Yes, sir. That does get passed on to everybody. You know, for the TVA, we're a public power entity, so we don't have shareholders, stockholders. Anything that we spend is exactly what we recover from our consumers.
So the public can hear it themselves, but you're gonna take some method to do something quick so that they don't get cut off and not have some notice to protect innocent people. I don't know, I heard that some people may have died because of that
Senator,
shutdown.
let me, it's about to get close to cross-examination, so.
I got one more.
One more quick question, because I've got Representative Fugit and Webb, and then we've got to get KU up here to testify.
I'd just like to know, is there any more in the process of that you all have planned shutting down?
Yes, sir.
And which facility is that?
We have 5 facilities on the system that have some planning dates. We've only announced one coal facility, which is the Cumberland coal facility. There are 2 units there. We've announced intention to shut down one of those units and build a natural gas plant there.
And can you provide that information to somebody so we can get that to us?
Yes, sir.
And I got one other response, Mr. Chairman. We all know why that we're gonna get renewables for those people that fly those jets around all the time so that they can fly them, and us getting shut down won't damage the ozone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Fugit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Up here on your right. Just a couple questions. What's the cost to TVA if you build a new natural gas generation plant? Do you know?
So a combined cycle facility is going to be in the ballpark of $1.5 billion.
And what's the cost of a coal-fired generation plant before regulatory fees or whatever from the government?
Honestly, in the last
If
decade,
you could build one.
We haven't even gotten a quote on one in over 10 years because it hasn't been feasible to think about it.
Is it not feasible because of government regulatory fees, or is it not feasible because of the price to build, as far as the materials to build it? You know what I'm asking? I mean,
yeah.
Is that because of 111B of the Clean Air Act, where they regulated that any new coal-fired power plants could only emit about as much carbon as what you could get from a natural gas facility?
That is absolutely a piece of what limits that capability.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So if the government did not put on those regulatory fees, then it would be cheaper probably to build a coal-fired plant. Is that right? Or around the same?
I'd say it's probably around the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go back to reliability. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in the hollers of East Kentucky, and we had a coal furnace in the basement of our house, my papa's house. And had we had solar panels, Papa couldn't have made the sun shine. He couldn't have made the wind to blow. But he'd say, "Son, go down there and throw another shovel full of coal in the stove." And no matter how cold it got at Papa's house, you had to raise the windows up because he kept it so hot. Since those days, I pastor a church in Hazard now, and I've got people in our church in their 70s that live in a single wide mobile home. They draw $652 a month, and last month their electric bill was $468. It's because of, no doubt, because of the federal regulations that were put on the coal-fired plant. Now, I don't know about District 75, but I know about District 84. And we enjoyed low electrical rates. And this is not an attack on you. I mean, you as men of TVA. It's just Kentucky Power, American Electric Power, and the power companies that we had the opportunities to enjoy cheaper electrical rates because of coal. And I don't know that I'll ever hush about talking about the reliability of coal, because it would make sense that if a coal-fired generation plant was there, you can't make the sun shine and you can't make the wind blow, but you could always throw another scoop of coal in that coal-fired generation plant, and it would take care of the people that you serve in our areas. This country was built on common sense ideas and common sense work ethics, and common sense has done went and flew out the window in this country. And it'd be good if we could go back to common sense kind of living. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Webb.
Brief comment and kind of a question, but I'm just an old coal miner that bought a new diesel truck. So I guess I'm a dinosaur. I did live through 77, 78. I see, there's other former coal miners in this audience, Judge Henry being one, and several of us up here. But I also have a couple energy degrees. And it amazes me, the shift that we have seen. The reason I like my diesel fuel is it started through this weather, believe it or not. My old truck did, and it didn't inhibit my right to travel. I stored that fuel on my farm. I've got buddies that actually make diesel fuel out of things you grow, and you can do that historically because technology's there. But I like that freedom that I have and the ability to travel and the ability to, if a constituent of mine is out of fuel, I can take them a tank of propane in my truck. If it was an electric truck with your brownouts and your blackouts, as we shift more to electric vehicles, which also I've been on this committee for about 25 years, and we get a lot of presentations about the grid and grid reliability and the potential attacks, and the insecurity of our grid. And as we shift towards a more electric-based mobility, I'm very concerned as a rural American how I'm going to do that. And I sit here and I listen, look at these patterns and the weather patterns that we all have to acknowledge have changed and are changing. And it worries me. I mean, these brownouts and blackouts would certainly affect that charging station that aren't even built in my area yet. If they were built, would they not?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to wrap up, and you better be good because we don't have time for any questions. So
I'll keep it even more brief than that, likely, because I know Mr. Melda came to talk about the operations of TVA, and hopefully we answered the questions that have been answered. So I'll just, in closing, say thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the partnership in Kentucky. Thank you to the local power companies we work with across the valley, but certainly here, because ultimately they played an important role in this as well. And I think, so the comment about, obviously it was not, our goal is to keep the power on 100% of the time. We were unable to do that, but we were able to act more surgically in the way we interrupted power because of the partnership with our local power companies. So the way it's worked was our request of them in order to execute their pre-planned rolling blackout. So we do hope that was done in the most methodical way possible. There's a lot to learn from that, and there's a lot to improve. Most of the local power companies are looking at different ways that load could be interrupted if it were needed to be. So again, just the partnership, I think, worked very well there. And then as far as, I just stress that TVA's initial form of power production was the ultimate renewable in hydro, right? And then we grew into coal, into gas, into nuclear, and into renewables. And ultimately going forward, it will take each and every one of those pieces. A balanced portfolio is definitely the best and most resilient way to address all the different economic and reliability drivers as we run this system and make the most prudent investments for the long term. So I'll echo what Aaron, Mr. Melda has already said, is that so as we go forward, we will balance reliability, resilience, affordability, and sustainability, not only to ensure that the power remains on today, but that it remains on to spur and to enable growth within Kentucky and throughout the valley. So it's our pleasure to be here, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. And let me say that there's no question a lot of people in this country have power in rural areas because of TVA and because so many other independent folks would not have built there because of the rate of return. And so you've done a great work. I just hope that you get back to your mission statement. I mean, when we look at the fact that since 2009, and that's pretty much the start of the Obama administration, in this country, we've closed over 300 coal-fired power plants, or about 40% of the coal-fired generation, and we're looking to close an additional 50% or so between now and 2040. I don't consider 10% coal as a balance. I really don't, and I certainly also don't see coal as strictly a backup power or a peaking power, because it's something designed to run, 24/7, 85, 90% capacity. So it has to have a much bigger percentage than that. And so I think that what this nation is doing is unsustainable. And I do feel that there was a time after 2009 that TVA's mission seemed to change to implement the Obama's Clean Power Plan. And I just think that's exactly what happened. I think the proof's in the pudding. But that wasn't y'all's decisions. You're much too young to have been part of that. So I do thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from LG&E KU and Lonnie Veller. And this other gentleman that's with you, haven't introduced himself. He's been seen around the Capitol a couple of times.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm David Freibert with LG&E and KU, and for you and committee members, we do appreciate the opportunity to give you our first look back on the events and the challenges and the things we've undertaken. And I have to my left Lonnie Beller, who is our Chief Operating Officer. And for time, I will just ask Lonnie to start what he's going to share with you.
Sure. I know we're short on time, so I will talk quick and allow time for questions. And as someone said earlier, the only reason we're here is because LG&E had a once in its long history event occur, and that is we had to curtail customers' usage because of lack of generation. First time in our history we've had to do that, and although it did affect a relatively small percentage of our customers, we share Chair Gooch's sentiment that this should never happen again, and most definitely shouldn't be something that occurs on a routine basis. So if we jump right into the presentation, I thought I'd start off just talking about how we think about planning and looking and at our system and how we plan for our system. I won't go through all the components. You can see the slides, you can have the slides, but you start off with the planning to do in advance, right? What you do 5, 10, 15, 20 years in advance of these events. Then you talk about your fuel supply. Those are long-term decisions also. What type of fuel contracts do we enter into? We want some fuel diversity, right? We want on-site inventory. We've heard a lot about that. Where are you getting that fuel from? Is there diversity there? And if we're transporting that fuel, is it diversity in that transport? Are we too dependent upon one transport path, whether it be gas or coal? Do we have that gas transportation that Texas Gas talked about? Do we have the storage necessary? And then we think about our plant operations. You can read those comments there. How are we maintaining that plant? Is that plant going to be ready? We've heard a lot of comments today. It was cold, but it's been colder, right? I always say in my career of 36 years, I've seen minus 22 degrees and plus 105 degrees. So you have to be ready for everything in Kentucky, and that is what we work hard to do every day. So again, moving quickly, were we ready for the storm? We were ready for the storm. We did all the things that were on the prior page. We managed our assets, we think, very aggressively, ready for the event. You can see here we implemented our cold weather operation plans that we have across our fleet, coal-fired and gas-fired plants. We bought the right gas, we bought the right coal, and we brought our units online and kept them running before the cold weather got here. While it was a cold weather event, the forecast showed that it was going to get cold, and it was going to get cold quickly. So we managed through that. And briefly, when we were setting on the morning of 12/23, we knew it was cold. It was -5, -8 degrees through our service territory. We were sitting there thinking we would have 25% more generation than we had load. That's what our thoughts were at the beginning of that day. And we have an obligation to serve the million customers that depend on us every day for energy. We also have an obligation to the grid. That's been mentioned here today. If there are challenges in our area to meeting load, we can't just take power from the grid that we didn't pay for because it represents a regional stability issue. So I'll jump right into what happened here again to move quickly. This is a bit of a complicated graph, but this on the time in the bottom starts out at 5:30 in the morning on 12/23 and goes to 11 p.m. on that date. And I will cut to the chase and give you the answer. Our load here is the blue line that you can see running through the middle of the graph. That was our load. That's what our customers used on our system. If it weren't for the Texas gas pressure issue that Texas Gas spoke to, we would have had generation that is represented by that dotted dash line at the very top of the graph, the net generation including lost generation from Texas Gas Supply. So we wouldn't be sitting here having that conversation if we had the pressure. Again, the gas was there, as we've discussed, but we did not have the pressure to run our generating units. I will say we operated our local distribution company in Louisville, served 350,000 customers with gas that day. So that's proof that the molecules were there. The commodity gas was there. But when it comes to generating units, you have to have the pressure in addition to the molecules, and the pressure just wasn't there. And the graphic here shows we lost 900 megawatts of generation. When we went into the event, that number was about 850. It grew to 950 and then curtailed throughout the day. In terms of the interruptions we did have, that's represented at scale on the right axis, and we had to shed load in the order of 317 megawatts. Relatively small percentage of our customer base, roughly less than 5%. And the bulk of those interruptions lasted around an hour and a half. The whole event from the start to the very single last customer came online lasted 4 hours and 13 minutes, but the bulk of the interruptions were in that first hour and a half. And so, again, to move quickly, summarizing again, we had a low gas pressure event at our Trinidad County turbines. We've been operating those since 2002, not had an issue. We had that same issue at our Cane Run combined cycle gas plant. We combined in those two plants, we have about 1,900 megawatts, and I just stated about half of that was unavailable. So just to be clear, the machines were there, they were running. All we had to do is effectively turn them up if we had the pressure. And we are working closely with Texas Gas. We've been a customer of theirs on the LDC for many, many years, and since 2002 on the generating side. And we're not resting, even though we didn't have significant cold weather issues at our plants. We're doing the same thing that TVA did. And every event we go through, we look at what we could do better and how we could serve our customers better. So that was a really quick run through, but I wanted to go quickly in respect of everybody's time and allow times for questions.
Okay. Senator Mills.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm up here. Sorry. I appreciate the presentation. Can you speak to the closures that you've submitted to PSC? Is that correct that you have a plant or two that's possibly being closed?
Yes, we have a filing with the Public Service Commission, and due to environmental regulations, as we've talked about here today, and aging plant, we do have one plant that is getting significantly near the end of its useful life. We would plan to close one unit at our E.W. Brown plant, which would be the last coal unit remaining there in Mercer County, and we would close 2 units at our Mill Creek plant, which is in Jefferson County, and then 1 unit in Gent and near Carrollton at our Gent station.
And just follow up, are there any are there any incentives like renewables get from the federal government? Are there any incentives that would allow you to rehab a plant like the one that you're thinking about closing down, or that would help keep that online for 10 or 20 years? Is there any possibility of keeping those online financially to start with?
Well, in terms of incentives, I'm unaware of any incentives to continue operating coal that are provided by the government. As we've talked about, there are incentives on the renewable side. In terms of what's financially viable, our filing lays out in excruciating detail what we believe is the right mix of resources, how we best can comply with those environmental regulations and serve our customers at the lowest cost.
So it's a regulatory, like we've said all today. It's a regulatory environment and not a financial environment. In the past, we've asked questions of utilities, power plants, if they could stay on, and we would get the answer, it's just too expensive to keep burning coal. The truth is that there's too much regulatory problems, too many federal regulations that keep that from happening. It's not a financial issue. Is that correct?
The regulatory constraints turn into a financial implication, is the way to look at it. They do require retrofits, additional new equipment on units, and that adds to the expense of operating a coal plant.
And then finally, what will be the mix to replace these power plants when you take them offline? What will be the 30-year plan to replace those?
So our current plan to replace the capacity, if you want to think about it that way, would be 2 new combined cycle units, one at our E.W. Brown plant, where the coal unit is being retired, and one at our Mill Creek station. We also would be looking to add solar. That would not be for capacity. It would be more to manage price risk that we have in cost of fuel, whether that be natural gas or coal. And then we're also asking to learn more about battery technology, a battery plant at our E.W. Brown plant.
Do you know if batteries have trouble with bad weather? Can batteries freeze up?
Most definitely. We have been running a test at our E.W. Brown with a relatively small battery. It's a large battery, but in utility sense, relatively small. So we have lots of data on the degradation that we see during the coal and the requirement to keep the batteries heated so that they will produce energy.
They do. Thank you for your answers.
Okay. I think that you've heard enough from the committee to realize that most people on the committee, not everyone obviously, but probably a majority of the committee are going to be hard to be convinced that part of the reasons that we had the shortages is because of the retirement of coal-fired power plants. I mean, it's just not going to, nothing you're going to say is going to convince us otherwise. This closure was just 2 weeks before the announcement of the E.W. Brown and the Mill Creek station. That's about 2,000 megawatts of power. I think where we're really concerned is that if we couldn't meet the demand now, we see this huge shift that everyone's talking about to electric vehicles. And everything I've seen is that we're going to require probably 30% more generation and 30% more infrastructure, transmission or whatever. What's going to happen if we see this huge shift to electric vehicles? If we can't meet the power needs now, how are we going to meet those power needs when this happens?
And that is something that we look at constantly, is what is that pace of change that we expect to see. We know with electric vehicles coming on the system, that's nighttime load, but it is energy. It's base load energy. It comes at the nighttime when solar won't be there. And so we factor that into our forecasts and update those constantly. It's a challenge that we know we need to be prepared to meet.
Okay. Well, I think that I'm going to speak for myself here, not the committee, but I am really concerned about utilities being able to announce a closure of one particular fuel source. Specifically, we're talking about coal. And when we look at what are you replacing that with, you cannot replace baseload 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, 85% capacity with something that's intermittent at 17%. If there's anything that this General Assembly can do to make sure that before the Public Service Commission approves that type of switch where you're switching, that's what's been happening. We're switching fuels from one particular source to another. We think that we need to be able to make sure that we're prudent in approving those types of switches, and we're not going to be able to do it with something that can't provide the same reliability, affordability, and resiliency as to what's being replaced.
Yes, I agree, and that's why our plan does have baseload capacity to balance that out, and we do a lot of work to ensure that system will be robust going forward and meet those demands.
Senator Turner, you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell us if the gas line got shut down, how long, the natural gas line, how long would you be able to do without gas? You have a plan for that if it got shut down totally?
Well, that would be a significant event. We would lose gas service to our power plants, which would impact our ability to generate electricity. And in our system, we would lose gas to the bulk of our gas customers on the local distribution company. And so I can't really give you an estimate of how long. It obviously depends on how much customers are using at that time. We still have 5,000 megawatts of coal capacity operating on our system today. So if we had a gas interruption on the electric side and demand were below that level, or if it were above that level, if we could purchase power from our neighbors, we could retain the system reliability. So it's very specific to the situation as to how long we could, in your words, withstand that type of event.
Well, based that question, I was standing in Louisville one time and going in and the building started shaking, and it was a small earthquake. So if we got an earthquake going south that took out hundreds of miles of the gas line that shut down for weeks or months, could you tell us what that would do to your industry to be able to produce electricity? If you tear down all the coal plants you talk about you're going to do?
Yeah, and in that extreme of a situation, obviously it would impact our ability to generate with our gas units. And it would, again, affect our local distribution company and supply. We have to think about customers who heat with natural gas additionally.
So it could affect all million of your customers, the whole million, if it shut it down for weeks.
Depending on the time frame, as I laid out earlier, that is possible.
Now, we've talked about the federal government. Are they making any effort to make sure we don't get people come from these foreign countries that's going to bomb our gas and shut down our power plants and all that kind of stuff? Or are you all working in conjunction with them in any way?
Well, we work with Transportation Safety Administration on security of the pipeline system. That is the federal agency in charge of that. So that would be the extent of our working with them to ensure that as safe as our pipeline infrastructure can be is what we end up with.
I've just heard on the news that all these people coming across the border, and we're getting these that they don't know who are from these foreign countries that could be terrorists. So I just want to know if you all have got some plans to protect us in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, there are all types of threats out there: cybersecurity, those impulses. What do you call those? EMPs that could take out our, a lot of. Power as well as other things, and I know you can't really plan for everything, but I think the reason for having this meeting is that we have seen that we've had a shift in recent years to different types of fuels, specifically fuel shifting, and that has caused rates to go up. That's caused reliability concerns, and we felt like this meeting was timely because an event that happened that we had never seen in Kentucky before. And, the purpose of this meeting was to ask you folks to come in and kind of explain what happened and what you plan to do to make sure that doesn't happen again. And we're here to tell you that, anything that this General Assembly can do to make sure that it doesn't happen, as if it's because of regulation. Representative Williams.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
You sure?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry I had to step out for a little bit. But I'm concerned. I know you have a gigawatt facility at Gent up there, and somebody said while I was out that you had said we're going to be out of coal plants. But we have a power in the near future, or what I think is the near future. There's a lot of heavy industries that depend upon that gigawatt. What are your plans for that plant?
For the Gent station?
Yes, sir.
So there are 4 units at the Gent station, roughly all the same size, 500 megawatts each, and we would plan to retire one of those 4 coal units that, due to an environmental regulation, the other 3 units have a piece of pollution control equipment we've already invested in the past, and that unit does not, and so we would retire that in the 2027-2028 timeframe. And then on our interconnected system, as I mentioned before, we would add 2 new baseload units, one at our E.W. Brown station, which is south of Lexington and Mercer County, and then one in Jefferson County at our Mill Creek station. And with our transmission system, we'll still be able to provide that industry along that 42 corridor, which we're very much aware are strong users of electricity, and they also need that strong source of electricity physically close, and we fully appreciate that.
Right. Haven't they just announced, several companies, a large expansion there as well? Are you going to be able to accommodate that additional power need?
Yes, NAS is currently our largest customer. I say that because Ford will take that over in the next few years at the facility in Hardin County, but they are our largest customer, and we coordinate closely with them.
So obviously I'm a bit skeptical that if you even take out one of those plants, that really is serving Kentucky and the customers well. I would like to look at what it would take to investment that we keep that unit open and provide that and bring these other plants online, because we need more power overall in Kentucky. We don't need to be taking that one plant out that's going to be used right there and bringing power from other places in Kentucky. So that's my concern. I'll be all about how we keep that one unit open to provide for growth there and the rest of Kentucky.
Yeah, let me say that in around 2000, the plans were all showing that we were probably looking at building 150 new coal-fired power plants in this country. Now we know that what happened was the recession in 2008 or whatever. Demand went down, and almost none of those were built. But not only did we not build those plants, we've already closed down 40% of our coal fleet, with plans to shut down another 50% by 2040, to the point where we're not going to have, hardly any coal, and that's people's goals. But everyone that I'm seeing is saying that, we can't replace it with what we're trying to replace it with. It doesn't work except in someone's mind. I mean, it's fantasy. And I'm really concerned when you have a president that just said that climate change was the biggest existential threat to our planet and to humanity, probably even more than nuclear weapons. I mean, that is the type of lunacy that that person doesn't need to be making policy decisions for this country. So especially someone who can't recognize and distinguish between the Salvation Army and the Secret Service. So, Senator Smith, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up. I know this thing has gone long, and we appreciate everyone's patience. I just have a couple quick questions. The fluidized bed, I've heard some conversation here today about what can and cannot be used, whether you could switch from coal to other forms of fuel sources. But my understanding is that's not that big of a deal. I mean, you could put lignite in a fluidized bed, if I'm not mistaken, or even a combined cycle if you wanted to. I mean, so I don't think that's a complete I don't want to say dishonest, but these new technologies are designed to shift between fuels relatively quickly for the exact purpose we're talking about, so that if you needed to go from one to the next, that new technology is there. So it wouldn't be a big deal to switch from coal to another fuel source, like what was said earlier. Is that correct?
I think it was spoken to earlier. Part of the challenge is getting anything new permitted that uses
So
coal.
that's the point. It comes down to the federal regulation telling you, which gets to my second point. Make this quick. You're looking at closing down this other unit that you've got, not because that it's not effective, but you were saying because you have an environmental issue with it. So the federal government's they're gonna give you guys take you to woodshed if you don't get this thing closed relatively soon. As a matter of fact, if you close it earlier, they'll reward you. Is that not correct? You'll get some incentives there, and you're going to pay for every kilowatt or megawatt you generate out of there after a certain point if you don't close it. Is that the truth?
With respect to the rule that's affecting some of our plant, we won't be able to operate it, actually. It will go from, as you just stated, a penalty, if you will, not having enough allowances to cover the emissions, to a rule that says you cannot operate unless you're below a certain emissions level. And without new pollution control equipment, we couldn't even operate the unit.
And I just want to be fair, because we're up here as legislators, and some of us have been here for a while, and some of us are new, and we're looking down at I don't want to put this on you. You are in a very tough spot, and you're dancing to a tune of whatever the swing of the federal administration is at the time that it is. I personally have got a lot of friends in the industry, and when the Obama administration came in, they were trying to make a decision about whether to hedge their bets and hold on, hoping that another administration would come. And it was a terrible spot to be in. But you either did it or you were going to be regulated out of business yourself. And so we saw the industry start getting directed where it almost became another branch of the federal government. You're going to do pretty much what they tell you to do, or they're going to punish you to the point that there's no more, your investors are not going to be there. You kind of have to dance to the tune of that. So I want our members to understand a lot of these decisions that are made have nothing to do with the price of coal, the efficiency or the effectiveness or the reliability. Has got to do with the fact that you'll get punished if you don't, and rewarded if you're able to close these things earlier, because we have a misguided federal policy that's failing California, Texas, all across the place. At a time when you talk about a threat, a federal threat, I'm more worried about the federal government closing down the utilities than I am a terrorist. I mean, we've got more concerns out there that are legit than what we're dealing with. And Germany and France and Great Britain and the other countries out there are doubling down on this technology because they understand that being energy poor in the next decade will destroy your economy in a way we've never seen before. So that's just my 2 cents. I don't want you all to leave thinking we're giving you a spanking. I think you should leave this plant open. And I think you should leave it open because we just got a glimpse of what's going to happen without having something that when everything else fails, you will be able to, that plant will run. Now, you get regulated and you can do a lot of stuff out there, but if a hospital had to have it, you know that plant's going to provide it. So I think there has to be something weighted in this scale of what we know actually works. You can put 6 months to a year to 3 years of product on that lot at that site and know exactly you have fuel every single day, like Representative Fugit said about his papaw shoveling that stoker coal in there. But what's important is that we deserve that. Our hospitals and our families and people here that have worked in this industry our whole life deserve that kind of reliability and affordability. But I just don't want you guys to think we're hammering you. We know that you're getting hit from both sides. But hopefully on this, if we can help you all do what happened to us in Eastern Kentucky when they closed Big Sandy down. Now we're paying this rider for the rest of our life for something that right now I bet they wish they had that power rate to get it down. But anyhow, we don't want to see you guys make the same mistake that happened to us in Eastern Kentucky. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wheeler is going to close us out, and as soon as he's done, this meeting's adjourned. We thank everyone for.
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, and this kind of piggybacks a little bit on Senator Smith's questions. I mean, to what extent are your revenue streams based upon direct subsidies for these types of renewable energies from the federal government? I mean, is that a part of your bottom line that you factor into these types of decisions?
You know, currently none. We have very few renewables, and in the future, we will take advantage of the tax credits, I think is what you're speaking to, whether they come in the form of what we call a production tax credit or investment tax credit.
So you're going to be replacing, I guess, units and jobs in your bottom line with tax credits that I guess we're all going to have to pay for on top of our power bills. Is that a yes or?
Well, we will take advantage of the tax credits as we should to lower the overall customer bill. Obviously, there are the implications of the federal government allocating those funds that we all pay. So
it's really not lowering any bills because we're paying in a different way, right? It's actually increasing bills by taking tax dollars that we all pay to lower bills. So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, isn't it?
Well, of course, if we have those tax credits available and we don't take advantage of them, that would be a detriment to our customers, of course.
Thank you. I think we all know the answer.
Okay. Committee members, there are some proposed regulations, administrative regs from Fish and Wildlife. They're on here. They require no action of this committee, but if someone has a question about one, I'm more than happy to get the answer.
Mr. Chairman, in all my nerdiness, I read those.
Okay.
And I do have a question or two, but I'll talk to Rich about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Wait, we have Fish and Wildlife, sorry. Oh, we already did, okay, thanks.
We already did that.
Thank you.
Wake up, Cinder.
Second that motion.
Thank you.